But welcome to the December meeting for Philadelphia SMPTE. Today we have Martin and Carl with us, and we're going to talk about stadium production workflow and how it's drastically changed in 2020 with the pandemic of COVID-19. How broadcasters, networks, news, and stadium entertainment found different and new ways to produce content or entertainment. Everybody's creative with it, and things that people used to push off to the side are now being considered. Remote monitoring, control, and changes in production have all gone around. We've seen a lot of changes, a lot of new things, a lot of old things brought back. In the past, our hurdles were to get the production of the content produced and delivering new ways to save cost and get better quality content. This old way shaped new products, created new formats, and changed how our content was stored and delivered. Now, these past transitions with COVID-19 changed the whole mindset of that. How do we get content to consumers? That was the priority now. So, with that being said, first we have Carl Mandell. He's a director of broadcasting and video production of the Philadelphia Union, and we have Martin Otremsky, the director of video engineering for the Philadelphia Phillies. And I'm going to start the meeting off with Martin for the Phillies. Take it away, Martin.
All right. Thank you, Mark. So, as Mark said, my name is Martin Otremsky, and I oversee the Phillies Video Engineering Group, which is within the Broadcast and Video Services Department. Some of you may know or remember a longtime employee, Dave Abramson. He retired last year, thereby making me the big guy. Part of our department is our game presentation group, informally known as Fanavision. And supporting Fanavision takes up most of the engineering group's time and resources. So what is Fanavision? Bear with me while I share my screen here. Let's see. Screen, share, and start show. All right. Hopefully, you see that?
Yep. That's
all right. Good. All right. So that's the 7-story computer monitor in left field, our main display. Whenever I give a tour of our control room, I always stress how we present the game. We don't cover it. Our equipment is similar in nature to what NBC Sports Philly uses, but we use it differently. For example, when there's an inning break or other stoppage of play, NBC Sports goes to a commercial and we spring into action. It's our goal to keep the fans engaged. So, for the 2020 season, without fans in attendance, why were we even needed? This was probably the most commonly asked question of all of us. A baseball game in a quiet ballpark is at best surreal and at worst disconcerting. Our goal was to make the game experience as close to normal for the players. Though in ordinary times, our show is primarily targeted to the fans, the players on both teams will usually watch replays and sometimes react to our fun videos. Also, in the absence of crowd noise, you also start hearing things that probably should not be heard by the general public, especially on broadcast. Though it's a big park, you'd be surprised how loud and clear a comment made from one of the bullpens in center field can be heard by the home plate umpire. While much of the reason for introducing the artificial crowd noise was to try and replicate the feel of the game with fans, we also had to drown out the occasional colorful players' commentary. Despite the lack of fans, we did as much as we could of our normal game presentation. We still had a PA announcer, pre-recorded national anthem that we shot outside the ballpark. We played the open video, announced starting lineups, played player introduction music, played music at the inning breaks. We swung the Liberty Bell for home runs. We ran instant replays, and as mentioned, we introduced the artificial crowd noise. Challenges going into the season. First, no one was even allowed into the ballpark until the season was announced. With the exception of an on-field charities concert that we did in June, we were effectively shut out from mid-March until July. That didn't give us a lot of time to get things ready for what would be a season like no other. We didn't even know until the season was announced to what extent, if any, a game presentation would occur. In addition, the team itself held its second spring training in the ballpark that July. Instead of heading back to Clearwater, they stayed in Philly and got ready at the ballpark. At first, we only had to work around the practices. For example, the crowd noise, which I'll go into more detail shortly, took a long time to dial in, mostly because we couldn't be in the stands or anywhere near the field when the players were there. Then, when the team was ready for intra-squad games, we were tasked to provide basic coverage of these games for the Phillies website. These were 4-camera shoots with 3 cameras locked off. This was complemented by the use of the scoreboard, in-game graphics, instant replays, and announcer coverage provided by our radio broadcasters. This was done out of the control room when we weren't doing pre-production. Another challenge was actually getting into the ballpark, even for full-time staff. MLB instituted a 3-tier access system. I myself don't like the use of the word tier, as it infers a hierarchy, which the system wasn't. Tier 1 was the field, bullpens, dugouts, clubhouses, and also the media room, parts of the main concourse, and most of the underground service level. Basically, these were any areas the players and coaches were likely to be. Jumping ahead to Tier 3, Tier 3 was everything not classified as Tier 1. There were a limited number of T3 personnel allowed in the building at any given moment, and security counted. You just couldn't show up for work. Security had to know in advance. Tier 2 had access to both areas, but these people were supposed to keep their time spent in Tier 3 areas to a bare minimum. Tier 1 and 2 personnel were tested for COVID every 48 hours. Tier 3 were tested as needed. We had one Tier 2 person in our department. He was a shooter, and I saw very little of him for 3 months, despite our virtually identical work schedules. We had to keep our distance. Another tier, which was added around the start of the season, TV tech. They had access to the TV truck docks only. MLB also had barriers set up with security guarding division points from Tier 3 to Tier 1. In other words, the place was a fortress. So here we are on July 23rd. Game on. What you see here represents our typical game day crew from the good old days. Most of the crew were freelancers with some full-timers thrown in. However, last summer, we were forced to pare it down. Without fans, there was no need for fan cams. And though the Fanavision cameras do cover the game during play, MLB was fairly specific about where the cameras could and couldn't go. Any logical place for us to put a camera was already covered by NBC Sports Philly. And since we had ISO feeds of their cameras in our system, there was no need to duplicate. We had no outside groups in attendance, no pregame entertainment, and pre-recorded national anthems. As a result, we needed far fewer people to run the show. These are some pictures I took during a random game last summer. That's Emily. She's one of our full-time producers. Ordinarily, you'd see 2 people in that picture, director on the right and TD on the left. That's the front of the control room. Ordinarily, there'd be 6 people across the front there. Last summer, we got by with 3. And I don't know if you can quite make it out. In addition to the 6 feet of spacing we had between people, our carpenters, our in-house carpenters set us up with some plexiglass barriers. That's the PA announcer on the left. That's the scoreboard operator in the middle. And then that's Dave on the right. He's producing the game and also running all the electronic signs in the ballpark. This is a shot on the left is our tape operator stations. Ordinarily, we would have 2 replay operators on the left and a third person sitting in the back for playbacks. With only a handful of camera angles to use and really only 1 or 2 playbacks per game, we consolidated everything down to the 1 replay operator. In the old days, you would have seen 2 people on the right, camera shader, and that's usually where we put our utility. The camera shader wasn't needed, obviously, because we had no cameras to shade. However, in the background, that's Val on the right. She's an AV tech, but we pressed her into duty with something new this year, a fan-based Zoom feature. Basically, it was a Zoom session with a small group of pre-invited fans. Though it took several forms, the most popular was a music video we'd make on the fly. Typically, during the 2nd or 3rd inning, we'd play a song to the group and record the people singing and dancing along to it. The operator would pin the feeds and usually finish with a crude music video. Then we played it out to the board during an inning break later in the game. I used the word crude literally, as that was part of the appeal. hold on. My PowerPoint froze. Here we go. All right, so there's our audio room. If anyone recognizes the guy on the left, that's my boss, Mark DiNardo. He's usually the executive producer and technically still was, but he's filling in on music. That's Sean Rainey, our senior producer on the right. He's the one running ballpark audio and, more importantly, crowd sound. The crowd noise system comprised 3 iPads. MLB provided us with 1 iPad running Soundboard Studio and preloaded with some basic crowd sound effects. On our own, we supplemented that with 2 more iPads that we already had in-house and identically set them up to the first. That's what the user interface looked like. The reason for 3 units was we quickly discovered that trying to do it all on 1 iPad was very difficult. And there's no such thing as a cheer. Simply put, there's 2 kinds of cheering, anticipation and reaction, and within each, there are variants. First, there's anticipation. Think of simple clapping that you would hear when a player is being introduced with no one on base and nothing else happening. It's fairly low key. Versus people on their feet cheering when Bryce Harper comes to the plate with runners in scoring position. Or another way to think of it, a routine pitch versus what you'd expect to hear with a 3-2 count and bases loaded. These were all different sound files that the operator chose based on judgment and the situation. There was no script or handbook. It was all done on the fly. And then there's reactions. Think of a relatively mild reaction to a routine fly ball or put out at first versus what you'd hear after a great defensive play, or we scored, or an important strikeout. We only ran positive sound effects. We did not run boos or play anything that might be perceived as negative. Operationally, all 3 pads were identical, but each was used differently. Their audio outputs were mixed on a small throwdown mixer, producing 1 composite feed that was fed to the ballpark and to the broadcasters. iPad 1 was for basic crowd noise. That ran on a 3-hour loop at a fixed audio level. After it was started, we didn't touch it again. The other 2 pads were used for anticipation and reactions, but that depended on the operator. The interface allowed customization. The whole crowd noise was a work in progress for much of the season. Not only which cheer to play, but how loud to make it. Over the course of the season, we had some of our own files taken from crowd noise from previous seasons. Among things, we realized it was one of the hardest positions on crew. To maintain consistency, we only had 2 different people run it. Our sound system is optimized for 40,000 water balloons in attendance. Even turning down the levels, we found the audio really bounced around the empty ballpark. Intelligibility was pretty bad. So through trial and error, and when the team wasn't around, we experimented with turning audio zones off and on. Eventually, we settled on turning off all the upper deck and around half of the lower bowl. Challenges in season. Because of team scheduling issues, we had several games at Citizen Bank Park where we were the visitors. To do so meant flipping the ballpark, as we call it. We plastered their team logos on the signage, played their pump videos, and played their player walk-up music. All this material was provided by our counterparts at the other teams. While the video and audio content was straightforward, all the graphics had to be resized and in many cases reoriented to fit our displays. Our graphics people were very busy on those days. And most importantly, we ran the crowd noise system for the benefit of the other team, cheering them on and not our guys. It was odd, to say the least. We were constantly cleaning the control room, wiping on all the equipment before and after the games. Even though we had a very small crew and number of people in rotation, we stayed on top of it, not just at work, but at home. Fortunately, all our efforts paid off as no one caught it, let alone spread it to the others. Though the control room and other press areas were classified Tier 3, which was my tier, I still had equipment in Tier 1 areas that I was not allowed to access afternoon on game days. That's when the cleaners would make their pass through the clubhouses and other Tier 1 areas before the coaches and players started arriving at 2 p.m. For example, this is a picture of our video coaching room. Kevin, our video coach, has something like 12 of his own cameras, most are PTZ, and operated by him for his own purposes. He digitizes every angle and compiles replays of every pitch for the entire game. His room is inside the clubhouse, an area behind the Iron Curtain. But my group supports him with the operation and maintenance of this equipment. I can't even tell you how many times I got kicked out before I was done fixing or troubleshooting something. I would have to talk Kevin through finishing it over the phone. The same applied for postgame. We were not allowed back in until the last Tier 1 individual had left the clubhouse after the game. It just made it harder to do the same job. Because we were considered essential Phillies personnel, we were allowed into the ballpark with conditions. As a result, we really didn't get into remote production or working from home very much. If someone had to work from home, invariably they'd copy files to a portable hard drive and take them home to work on. It was a bizarre season, but I was grateful we had baseball even under those circumstances. While I'm hoping things are back to normal next year, since we did it before, we can do it again. The end.
Thank you, Martin, for that presentation. Very interesting, and makes you think a lot more of what actually goes on and how much work you guys put into it for this season, how much more work you put into it. So thanks for doing all that. That being said,
I didn't. Go ahead.
Go ahead.
Well, I was gonna say I didn't want to, overstress the point about the whole access to the point like I did this for my kids last night and they thought I sounded a little whiny. But the reality was we weren't doing everything we've been doing. We were doing everything from scratch. And every time we'd have a great idea, we're like, well, we can't do that now because we're not allowed down there. So I can't tell you how many times during the creative process we'd come up with solutions only to have to sit on them until the next morning to see if they'd even work. So it's just I know what MLB was getting at by keeping us from the players, but it just made doing our job in an unusual environment that much harder.
Yeah, understood. So that being said, I'm going to open up the floor to questions. Anybody have any questions they'd like to put forward?
Can I ask a question?
Go ahead.
Fascinated by how you move things around and were very flexible. How much did the outside of the stadium noise affect you? I know there was a lot of stuff that they talked about, air horns and cheering, sometimes clapping and stuff like that. How did that affect what you did? Did you purposely try to cut it out? Did you, was there a demand by fans that, hey, let's hear that?
Well, I tell you what, the first couple games, to be honest, we didn't know what to make of them. The Fandemic crew, as they were known out in center field.
Yeah, that's right.
And be honest, we thought they'd be out there for a couple games and then that'd be the end of it, especially, first heat wave in July. I'm like, oh, we won't see them. And much to our surprise, not only did they stay for the entire, first homestand, they came back for visiting games. And we, I don't know if you guys realize, when NBC Sports, did the road games, they still had their announcers at the ballpark. They were sending the feeds back to their truck, which was still here, and they cut the game in Philly. So the Fandemic crew would watch the game, I guess, either on TV or on their devices. And even though there was no action in the ballpark, they were still cheering along. And invariably, those sounds made their way into the announcers' microphones. So at first, we just didn't know what to make of them. But then after a while, we as a group didn't exactly help them along, but we didn't do anything to remove them from the equation. In fact, actually, if you guys go to the store now, I think they got a bobblehead for those guys.
Hey, Martin, it's Greg. Greg Hecker, how's it going?
Doing okay. It's
yeah.
I'll be a lot happier when the vaccine's out and we get 40,000 in the stands.
I can only imagine. Not only you, but I just wonder how life has affected all the freelancers whose living is tied to doing these sporting events. It just must have been terrible across the board for them.
Well, without getting overly elaborate, I use the word freelancers because that's a term that everyone, on this call probably understands. But in the case with the Phillies, we legally classify them as part-time employees, so we withhold taxes and things. So I know the Phillies, when things first went south, they actually they did divvy out some unemployment checks, compensation for the crew, and it was roughly based on how many games they worked the previous year. So while there was no true, full compensation for those that all of a sudden found themselves without work, the Phillies did try to extend a little bit of olive branch financially. But yeah, it was bad. part of the game just working is being around, these people. And in that sense, it wasn't as fun because we were pretty much, it was the same group of full-timers there every game. And we kind of got tired of looking at each other. So at least when you're freelancers, you got
Right.
other opinions, other voices, other things that, is brought to the table and makes games sometimes a little bit more livelier.
The other question I had, if I can follow up, I read an article where because of some COVID situation with the Yankees, you actually had to produce a Yankees home game from your facility. What was that like? What was that like? Essentially being the visiting team.
Well, it's funny, Greg, you should mention that because I wasn't, this is a technical group and they can certainly handle stats and numbers. When I said we only had 2 people running crowd noise, that wasn't entirely true. I ran the crowd noise for a good part of the Yankees game because our operators are so used to following what our guys do. So, like, I don't want to mention who it was, but he kept having to stop himself from hitting cheer when one of our guys would do something. Like, no, we're a Yankees team today. So they put me in there because I'm much more neutral in that sense. So it was weird. But then the whole year was weird. The whole season was weird. So this was just one of many things that just make you shake your head.
Were there any processes that you encountered this year that you might just carry forward because you just realized, it makes more sense to do it a certain way, or things you really don't want to do?
I'll tell you what, if like, and we've been hearing all kinds of things. I mean, if the vaccine's out, we can get fans back in. I mean, obviously we prefer to do games with fans. If it's a hybrid where, say, the city of Philly limits us to 15, 20,000 or something, and we still have more of an interest, the Zoom feature, like I said, it was crude, but that was actually kind of funny. And even like we didn't get one-on-one feedback from the players, but we got indirect comments that they were glad that the fans were still, tuning in, still, part of the process. So they, at least once a game, we showed them that there were, at least a dozen fans out there who were still interested in being part of the process.
How do you think it might alter some of your?
Sorry, Winston, knock it off. I'm sorry, what?
Alter some of your thoughts moving forward? Plans for next year, both technology, people, operations, that sort of thing.
Well, I hope not. I mean, we haven't. I mean, we did learn some things from last year. As far as like the press conferences were a little wonky. We did those with Zoom, and we had to keep it simple because the press conferences took places in areas where we could not support them. In fact, we set the equipment up in the morning and then just hope everything still works. 9 hours later. We showed the PR people how to use the equipment and how to do basic troubleshooting, but next year we might, if it came to it, we might invest in some, PTZ cameras of our own and try to bump up the quality a little bit. But no, our goal really is just to go back, at the very least, to the way we used to do things, and then hopefully in another year or two, we're upgrading our control room anyway.
Thanks.
Sorry about the dog.
Martin, I'm going to throw one in here for you. You guys looked at using Dante and NDI and SMPTE 2110 for moving, audio and video signals around the stadium digitally, especially for areas where you really can't reach directly all the time.
Not really. The ballpark came pre-wired with, traditional analog cable here, there, everywhere. I can't say it'll never happen, but I don't see it in the near future. Based on a game presentation, probably not. I know exactly where you're going, Chuck. It's just at this time, I don't want to go off tangent by talking about, the financial situation. Our budgets, our operating budget last year was zeroed out, and our capital budget for this offseason was decimated. So while we may have some ideas, for the most part, they're just, pie in the sky at this point. The Phillies are reluctant to really go in any one direction unless it's absolutely positively critical.
All right. Well, thanks, Martin. Any other questions before we wrap up with Martin here and move on to Carl? Nope. Okay. Well, Martin, thank you very much for that presentation. It was great. I appreciate it. A lot of knowledge there in a short period of time, and thanks for sharing with the different ways that you got involved with it. Very interesting. So
My
thanks
pleasure.
there, and thanks a
Thank you.
lot.
Mhm.
At that point, I'm going to turn it over to Carl. Carl is going to talk to us now and give his presentation, and then again we will do another Q&A after him. Go ahead, Carl.
All right, let me get my screen ready to go. Bear with me real quick where I find, here it is. You guys can see my PowerPoint deck? All right.
Yes, we can see it.
Great. All right, unique year for us. First off, again, my name is Carl Mandell. I'm Director of Broadcasting Video Production for the Philadelphia Union. For those who don't know, we are in our 11th season. We just wrapped up our 11th season. I am one of the original employees with the team, so I also was wrapping up my 11th season with the team. Big year going into this year. This year presented a lot of great opportunities and excitement for our department. We were going into the stadium's first major renovation with upgrading all of our video boards, our television displays around the stadium, our control room, and then we did a whole renovation of our tunnel club coming into the 2020 season. So that renovation started at the end of 2019 with the board and the control room being demolished and all the old equipment going out, construction starting to take place, and then come early January 2020, the integrators are starting to load in new equipment. So you can already kind of paint a picture for my department, which let me just kind of clarify what my department's all responsible for. My department is responsible for all of the in-stadium production. We produce our own broadcasts for television, which is on PHL 17 and 6 ABC here locally in Philly. And then we provide all the video content that also goes on our website as well for digital. And my team consists of a motion graphics artist, a couple of post-production producers, and one of our producers who is full-time on our team, who does all of our broadcasts on television. So coming into this year, a lot of expectations on our end. We have all this new equipment, $7 million renovation in our stadium, the largest renovation to date in our stadium, because our stadium opened up in 2010. Here we are, getting all of our integrators in. They're putting all their equipment in. We had our USL team, Philadelphia Union 2, our minor league team, playing their first game in early March, strategically done so that we can get a warm-up game. In our Union team, our first team, they played on the road for the first two games as the video board's going in, and then we're getting ready for the home opener, and then all of a sudden we're sent home. So, and then by the way, we're an HDR facility and we are novice in the HDR space. So we went from a 720 control room into a 1080p HDR control room. So you can imagine walking into a year like this with the high hopes and expectations to all of a sudden getting ready for your home opener and then going home, not really knowing your equipment fully, and then just going through some training, and all of a sudden here you are, you're sent home, the week of your home opener, which we were kind of anticipating at that point that it wasn't going to happen based off of all the protocols that went in place for our second division team and everything that's going on around the league. We were kind of being tipped off that the game was probably not going to happen. But as it relates to us, we're going full steam ahead. We have freelancers coming in every day. They're getting trained. Our engineers are in. We're testing out all of our new graphics. We're still trying to figure out the color space. So our vendors are still working on all the color space between Everts and Ross and Planar, who do our video boards. So they're all trying to work in this HDR space because we're one of the first HDR facilities at that point. And then boom, we go home. So a lot of challenges there. And then, our team, our season picks back up. We find out the team's going back into play down in Orlando bubble. We don't know what's going to happen after this Orlando bubble. and we had this new control room. We have this new video board. Our integrators couldn't come back because they're all out of market. They're in areas like Atlanta, where at that time were high risk. They weren't allowed to come to Pennsylvania. We have all this new equipment that we have a good understanding of. And for instance, for Ross, they're in Canada. They're not allowed to come down. Their company wasn't letting them come down to help complete some of the work that was expected. So they're remoting in. And then all of a sudden, our front office is telling us, hey, we're going to have watch parties. So let me back up also. We're not in Philadelphia, so we don't have a lot of the challenges that Martin has with the Philadelphia restrictions. We were more limited to the state of Pennsylvania, and then specifically we're in Delaware County, so our restrictions are a little bit, I want to say, looser than what the Philadelphia restrictions are. So for us, we were allowed to have 50 fans, I think at that time, 50 fans in our facility watching games outside, and I think it grew over time as the restrictions were lifted. But we had these games being played in Orlando, and so we were trying to get some of our core sponsorship folks and our season ticket holders free of charge. There was dots all on the field. They were all socially distant, out and by family. There was an RSVP system where they would go ahead and come to the games and watch the game on our video board, and we would provide them a smaller in-stadium experience as if the team were playing right out on the field. In addition to that, to make up for our loss, or to fulfill our commercial assets on the broadcast side, we were then asked to provide pregame and postgame shows, which we use via TriCaster, and the integration of our control room. So we're sending our replay lines down to the TriCaster, a couple of PTZ cameras that we used, and then we had a fiber line coming in from Orlando to get some B-roll from what they're shooting down with ESPN, and we're producing pre and post game shows around these games. So a lot of we had the control room, and now we're being asked to produce these shows, and we're trying to still figure out our control room because we still have sponsors coming in for the very first time to see our control room or to see our stadium, and they have this expectation of a brand new board. And on top of all that, our stadium changed names from Talon Energy Stadium to Subaru Park. So now there's a whole expectation on how Subaru's logos and signage is all being presented around the stadium. So our heads were definitely spinning at the beginning of the season through the MLS's back tournament. The tournament ends in early August. Then we find out, okay, there's going to be 18 games, 9 home, 9 away, back in market. And in our area, we were starting without fans. And I'm saying we started without fans because I'll get to a little bit on how that changed for us. But we started back in early or late August. We started up with our season back in market. For the MLS players, when they would travel, we'd play 1 to 2 games a week. They would travel in via charter the day of the game and charter out the day right after the game's over. So they weren't staying overnight. It was all regionally based, and if they could drive to New York or DC or in this place, New England, they were also doing that. But yes, we started our games back up at the end of August, and there was a lot of debate, kind of like what Martin said, around the audio. The audio is a very, very hot topic. We were able to see what MLB was doing with their audio. We saw what the Premier League was doing with their audio over in England and the Bundesliga in Germany. And the debate was, what are we going to do with our audio? And so for our audio, and I'll kind of touch on that as well. For our audio, we ended up running, each MLS team was able to produce audio however they saw fit. They could produce no audio. They could produce audio for just in stadium. They can produce audio for just the broadcast, or it can go both in stadium and on broadcast. And then for the road team producing remote shows, they have the option if they want to take the audio at all, or they could just have silence and hear the net sounds from the stadium. So what we did was our coach had a couple of training sessions on our field. We ran the audio for him, and then we let him make the decision on what he wanted. He actually opted to not run with crowd audio in the stadium. He felt like he didn't want to yell and compete with the audio in the stadium when he's trying to coach, and saw it as a disadvantage. So we were one of the teams in MLS. I think we were one of the few teams that opted to not have crowd audio in the stadium. However, we did have crowd audio on our broadcasts. And for those who aren't really familiar with the soccer culture, we have a supporters group, Sons of Ben. It's very common in soccer to have these supporters groups where they're chanting, they're standing the whole entire time. We were able to sample 10 years worth of audio from all of our games and create our own soundboard, which we did. What we did was, with our crowd audio, we created a 35-minute bass track with no whistles, no emotional sounds. We gave that down to the truck. And then what we did was, we had one of our fans from the supporters group, you see him in the bottom right-hand corner. What he did was, we set him up with a laptop with all the emotional sounds. Yes, we did have boos in there. We had all kinds of cheers. We had, when the visiting team scored a goal, how the crowd would react. When our team scores a goal, the emotional sounds there. We had all kinds of Sons of Ben chants, and rises in the crowd after a shot that was missed, or oohs, ahs, all these different types of emotions. And we told them, hey, this will react how you would react. If you feel like you want to get up and scream at the team, then go ahead and hit the emotion. And so he was doing that for all of our games that we had with fans. And I'll tell you that we tried it without crowd audio, and we tried it with crowd audio. And the reaction we got from our supporters was fantastic. You know, they really appreciated the attention to detail that we put into the audio. I thought, you know, having listened to a lot of what MLB's doing and what the NFL has been doing with their audio, and even some of the international soccer, you know, I felt like the audio, and maybe I'm a little biased, but I felt like some of the audio that we were doing was a little bit more authentic to our stadium, and it wasn't as canned, because we did scan 10 years worth of audio specific to our stadium and nowhere else. So I thought that was a huge success for us. In addition to that, we had no fans in the stadium to start. We had virtual ads, which you see in these two slides up here. And it was really out of our realm because we didn't work with virtual. I know NHL has virtual going on their glass, and the NFL uses virtual for their first down markers, but it was a new territory for MLS. It was a new territory for us. And there were all kinds of restrictions on what we could and could not do. So being able to work with these different vendors and choosing the correct vendor was a very lengthy process that actually started back in May, with the anticipation of us being able to do this. We ended up going with a company called Brand Brigade, which I think MLB also used for a lot of their games as well. With Brand Brigade and MLS, we were allowed to put virtual ads on the field, which you can see behind right next to the goals. And then there was all these restrictions on virtual going on around the stadium. And so we're one of the few teams that kind of looked at what MLS allowed us to do. And we kind of wanted to make the artwork a little bit more visually appealing. And yes, the stadium was empty, but we wanted it to look exciting. And you can kind of see that through our artwork. And I think MLS ended up using our artwork as a showcase around the league on, hey, this is how you can bring the best out of your stadium atmosphere by providing some creative artwork. And then if you look at the bottom of the screen or the middle of the screen, you see the childhood cancer. So every September we have our pediatric cancer awareness, and during the broadcast, which would typically be an in-stadium element where you would see maybe a card stunt. You see a lot in international soccer where you see the cards flipping, the fans holding them up. We wanted to create that virtually. So in stadium, I'm producing the show upstairs. I'm completely talking with our virtual partner, my counterpart who's down in the truck. I'm on a PL line with him. And we created this really, really cool move at the top of the broadcast, which we were also taking in stadium as well. So it was also appearing on our video board. Any of our virtual artwork, it appeared both in stadium on the video board, and we were able to create this really cool moment where it looks like all the cards are flipping in the stadium. It was another just unique way to kind of bring that soccer culture to our broadcast, both mostly on broadcast, but definitely in stadium as well. Challenges, a lot of challenges similar to what Martin said. We also had a tiering system. Our tiering system consists of tier 1, which is a lot of what Martin said, tier 2, which is the group that can kind of go between tier 1 and tier 3. We had a tier 2 match day, which these folks got tested 24 hours prior to coming to the stadium, and they had a lot of the same access as the regular tier 2 people. However, they did have a couple areas that were a little off limits to them. And then we had tier 3. Tier 3 was everybody else who was allowed into the stadium, and there was definitely a lot of people on our front office staff and our normal staff that were not even allowed in the stadium. Over 75% of our regular front office staff were not even allowed to step foot on the footprint of the building. So if you were one of the lucky people to come into the building, you were likely a tier 3 person. My crew was all tier 3. Majority of the broadcast crew was all tier 3. We had 5 members that were tier 2 match day. This was an A2 that was on the field. It was our jib and our jib assist, our red hat, our handheld, and his utility, and that was it. And for MLS, they only allowed 2 cameras on the field. We usually have 3 broadcast cameras on the field, and in stadium we have another handheld that would be on the field. So between all those, you were only allowed to have 2 of those. So we had to select. So what we ended up doing was we took our low mid camera and we took seats out of our midfield location where the fans would sit, and we made a little camera spot that was about 15 rows up from the field for our low mid, because we wanted to be able to have our handheld and our jib on the field. So that was unique for us. In addition, on my full-time staff, we had 2 of my guys were full-time tier 1 guys. They got tested with the team, and they traveled with the team exclusively, and they worked out of the training facility. They were the only ones working out of the training facility. They were tested every other day with the team before games and exclusively after games. In addition, we had 1 tier 2 person who literally was doing a lot of the same things that our full-time producers and shooters were doing, but also he would be able to come up to our control room on game days, get some equipment. He was our pseudo engineer, because all of our engineers at our stadium are freelance, and they were not allowed into the press conference room or back of house where the locker room area was. So our tier 2 full-time producer, who is a little bit more tech savvy, who runs a lot of our streams, he was mixing our audio for our press conferences. He was doing all of our streaming for our press conferences down in the press conference room. He was going down at the field level, running cable for us and doing the different things that really we couldn't do on a normal game day. Our press conferences, I think Martin also talked about as well, but for us, it was I honestly look at it as a huge success. We did use Zoom, and I think the way that we were doing it seemed like a lot of other teams were starting to adapt. I got a lot of questions once we rolled out with our Zoom plan by some other MLS teams. And what we ended up doing was we had a PTZ camera in our press conference room that was part of our upgrade. We went up to our control room. The person I told you, tier 2, was mixing our audio. We put a 65-inch monitor television screen right below that PTZ camera. I took an SDI to USB converter box, put it into a laptop, a gaming laptop, and we patched that feed directly into Zoom. And then we put the Zoom feed on presenter mode. And so that we asked all of our media members to make sure that their cameras are available. We didn't want anybody to not have their cameras on. And every single time our press officer started talking or unlocking someone's feed, it was almost identical. The coach was looking directly into the face of the media member, and they were looking right back. So it really presented this one-on-one experience. Our coach really enjoyed it. Honestly, he said he wants to do it next year. So it's something that I think we might adopt. And for us, because we're an international sport, we had people from all around the world getting on our Zoom call, all kinds of media members. We had people from England jumping in, asking our coach questions. We had national media members jumping on, having these conversations. So the audience for our press conferences drastically grew. It was a huge success. Really happy with how that took place. And then, we ended up having fans in our building. So then we had fans in our building for the final, I think it was 4 home games of the season. And if you are keeping track, we were a week before the Eagles actually had fans. So what ended up happening was with us, Delaware County, or I should say, the Steelers had fans in their building because the governor lifted the restrictions, or he, made a change to restrictions. And then Delaware County, which is where we play, also fell in line with the state of Pennsylvania. So the Steelers had their game on Sunday, and I think our game was on that following weekend or maybe that Wednesday. I can't recall. And then after we had our game, I believe the Eagles ended up a week later having their fans in the building. It provided some unique challenges for us in a sense that we were deciding, well, what do we do with our virtual? We're covering up all the stands. Do we show the fans? Do we not show the fans? Ultimately, we decided that we're going to keep the virtual because we were only allowed, our stadium holds 18,500. We were allowed 2,700 people in our building. And then by the time you get through coaches and staff and all those different people, it was about 2,300, 2,400 people in our building. So we opened up the whole entire stadium, and we did allow fans in. Again, with our crowd audio, we ran the canned crowd audio for one game with the fans, and then the remaining 3 games we ended up deciding to just get rid of it because the fans were loud enough in the stadium, and the effects mics were powered up a little bit higher than normal, which it satisfied the need to have the crowd audio from the fans in the stands. So couple changes there. Our in-stadium show, we do show the game live on our video board, and so the whole entire time we were just taking frame syncs from the truck and cutting the show on our video board. We're putting them through some Aja HDR frame syncs, which we ended up, kind of tweaking the colors to give it somewhat of an HDR effect. Obviously, it's not the same thing. And our brand new cameras that we bought are sitting on the shelf. So it was a little bit of a disappointment there that we have all these great new toys. We didn't get to try any of them. And luckily, our team really performed this year. Where our last game of the season, we were in a position where we're going to clinch a trophy for the best overall record in the league, the Supporters Shield. And so our president said, "Hey, listen, it's a special moment. I want you guys to be able to capture it the way you want to capture it. Bring a couple cameras in so that you can do what you need to do." So we brought in two of our extra freelancers, and we ended up using 2 cameras. We were able to finally test out our HDR cameras and go through the workflow there, which was unique. And then we went to the playoffs, and we also had another game where we were able to kind of troubleshoot there and add that. And one of those cameras was a 4K high frame rate camera. So just getting that to work in a Dreamcatcher correctly and making sure that it was displaying was a unique challenge. And we didn't have the support that you would typically have when you have a new control room opening. Like typically your control room integrators in there, and they're watching what's going on. And then you have the vendors from the different companies in there, which we still all have that support for 2021 now when we have a full show. But here, there's the expectation. We have these special moments of these games that are going on. We're about to win trophies, and we don't have the full support. We're still trying to learn the room, and we go from taking all the truck feeds into now really ramping up our show. Just to give you a little bit of a background on what our shows typically look like to where we were at. Typically, we're right around 20 positions on game day. And then in the COVID world, we were down in our control room in stadium. We were down to 7 positions. So myself, I'm producing the show and running clips. And then we had one of our full-time members. He was running expression in pregame, and then he would jump over to our Dreamcatcher and run replays. We did hire a TD and someone who was running all of our ribbons and graphics on our boards. Our PA announcer had his own booth. Our audio, our A1 had his own booth as well. Our control room, anyone who's been in our control room, was really, really small. We knocked down a lot of walls, so we're really, really lucky that our control room is a very, very open floor plan right now. And all of our computers were on a KVM. So we were able to really spread each other out and really have one person per row in our control room. So we really weren't short on space there. Overall, you know, in addition to some of the other challenges, our staff's walking in, they're getting temperature checks every day. They had to take a survey before coming into the building every single day. If the survey comes back not in their favor because of a potential high risk, they weren't able to work. And we had to scramble to find a new person. That only happened one time this past year. It happened with our director on our broadcast show, where we had to get another director in within 24 hours. Luckily, that person has directed our show a couple times in the past, so we were good there. But overall, you know, it was a challenging year. It was a unique year. I think if we had to do it all over again, honestly, I think I was really happy. I'm one of the rare people that I was really happy with how things happened, because when you get a new control room, you can always say, what's the one thing that you would like to have? And it's the gift of time. And I think we had the gift of time with our control room, being able to start really, really fast and ramp up with all the vendors, and then all of a sudden come to a pause, to then coming back a month before they go back into the MLS's back tournament to start to get ourselves caught back up, to then have these watch parties, to then have no fans, to then have fans, then add cameras. It's really nobody really gets that kind of leeway when you're building a new control room. It's boom, control room gets built, usually gets built, and you're ready to go a week before your season starts, and then boom, you're expected to just have a great show. So we were given the gift of time, and yeah, it was a great experience for us.
All right, thanks, Carl. Open it up now to any questions. It's pretty dead. Come on, somebody must have a question.
Yeah, this is Tom. Just you touched on this about the playoffs. I know, you know, having an extended season was a really cool, and the record was great. Any particular things that stood out that you guys were in the playoffs and your production? You know, anything changed for your production? I know you did talk about some of this, but anything special related to playoffs that you would never have had before?
In a COVID world or in a non-COVID world?
Well, clearly in the COVID world, but it may be common to a non-COVID world because playoffs are extra games.
Yeah. So for the playoffs, we did add pyro, which we typically would do a handful of times over the course of the year via our rivalries, nationally televised games, and playoffs. So we'd added pyro. We did go into in a not video board related, but part of our in-stadium presentation, we added these fog machines at the corner of each goalpost, which we had connected directly up to the control room, which we were going to set off. We didn't use those throughout the whole entire season. However, we did set that up for the playoffs as well. And then from the in-stadium production, we did add some additional cameras for in-stadium specific to really to enhance that show, because we did have fans in the building. We wanted it to feel a little bit more special than regular games. I will say the only other thing that I did throughout the year that I really wanted to touch on that I forgot to touch on is we created a unique experience. You see Andre Blake here in the upper left-hand corner. What we did have is we have a PTZ camera in that tunnel club, which was another new renovation for us in the off season that involved myself. And what we ended up doing is we had a PTZ camera, and we put Zoom feed on all the screens. And when the players are coming in and out of the locker room during warmups, and when they're coming in from their cars, they were able to, we did a family member moment where they were able to wave to their family members when they weren't able to come to the stadium. And then we had special moments for our fans, where as they're coming in and out for warmups, they were able to wave at the camera, and the fans, we had a feed from the tunnel club going into the Zoom feed, and they were able to wave back and have that interaction with the players. So it was a really cool, unique moment that we were able to create then. We only did it for a couple games because at the end of the day, I think people were getting sick of being on Zoom. They just wanted to watch the games. But for this first couple of games, it's really a special moment.
A lot of good stuff, Carl, and also Martin earlier. Thank you so much.
Hey, thank you both, Carl and Martin. I appreciate that. We're at the top of the hour here, and I know Martin and a couple others have to leave for other meetings. So thanks again, Carl and Martin, for that wonderful presentations. A lot of information, a lot of new things. So it was great. Great job, guys, your presentation, and good luck with your season next year. So
Thank you, everyone.
thank
Thanks for
Yeah,
having us.
great insight and great topic, guys.
Mhm. Thank you.
Yeah, it was well done. Appreciate the insight.
and
Take
thank
care,
you
everyone.
everyone for showing up. And we'll see you soon. We'll try and plan another presentation probably for January. So you'll get in your emails. Take care.
You too.
Guys.